All right, welcome back to the Firefighter Craftsmanship podcast, where we guide you through the psychology of high performance, expand your mindset, and strengthen your resilience. And today we're very excited to welcome to the Firefighter Craftsmanship podcast. I got an opportunity. My very first podcast appearance ever was on the Crew First Culture show with Jeremy Sanders, and I'm stoked to have him back. It's good to see your crazy Oklahoma face this morning, Jeremy. Welcome to the show.
And I appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this for a while. You know, we haven't had a lot of conversation between the two of us, but what I see from you and the direction your mind is heading and all that, it's so interesting, and that's where I'm heading to. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation, but to continue to build that relationship, because I think we can do a lot of good things together and spreading out all the message we have. So thank you very much for having me on. And it's cool for you to say that was your first podcast. You know, it kind of makes me feel good that, you know, you got something from that and decided that you wanted to do the same thing and kind of branched out. So it was awesome.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the cool part about, emergency services or the fire service specifically is it's a really, really small community when you get down to it, right? And
Yeah.
there's a lot of people out there that are on your team and on your side that will also fact check you when you need it. And some of those people you never actually talk to, right? And so that's one of the ways that I've used the Crew First Culture podcast along the way is, and I might need some inspiration or like I have a kind of a question, and that's a resource that I've been using to kind of help from a voice that initially I had never talked to you personally, but was using you somewhat as a mentor along the way. And now the community that both you and I have built have like absolutely crossed over where,
Yeah.
you're getting to do some stuff with tactical resiliency training and the TRT boys there. And we'll kind of talk about that. We'll chase some rabbits, I'm sure, in relation to that with Rick George and Dave Gillespie and the rest of the crew there. So, which is a group of dudes that we've been very fortunate to teach with over the years at different conferences, Metro Atlanta Firefighter, MAFC, and as well as Mile High and Firemanship up in Portland. So a lot of crossover there. So it's kind of cool that, it started kind of far apart and then we are playing a little bit in the same circles, and it's going to be a fun conversation today. So thanks for taking the time.
Bet.
So let's kind of talk about Crew First Culture. You had a little bit of a gap in there, so you were pretty consistent with cranking out podcast episodes. And for those of you that have never had the joy of producing and creating a podcast, it's a little bit more work than you would imagine. And you were cranking out episodes very, very consistently and had some great content in there. And then you took basically a year off. So how was that? Like, how did you grow during that time? What was kind of the impetus of needing to take a little bit of a break? Because at some point, all of us need to take a break from something.
Yeah. Man, I think this last little section, which has been since basically the first of the year, is really just a small echoing of how the whole thing has been. You know, I started doing things, not necessarily the podcast, but started doing things with Crew First in towards the end of 2019. And of course you had to start slow. So, but once it got rolling, I was putting out a lot. I think at that time I was doing 2 episodes a week and really into it, and found out that my priorities were way off. I was spending too much time doing it. And so I had to kind of check myself and straighten some things out. And so there was a dip there, and kind of took some time off and slowed things down. And, after a little while, got back into it. I think 2023 was really a good year to kind of almost, if you want to call it reborn or whatever, just to re-engage again. I think I got really consistent again in 2023, and then things happened in December of that year and January of this year, and really caused me to have to not only slow down but just take a step back. I've never planned on being done. I've never planned on stepping away from all this stuff. but through, career wise with the organization I'm with, things were happening that, for one, I needed to step away just because of that. And really, maybe even a bigger part of that was I just, I have to be engaged mentally and with my heart and with the message that I have to share, or I can't. I mean, it's almost like everything needs to be flowing good. And I wasn't there. I mean, I was absolutely not there. And so, but it was good. It was good because, like you said, I was able to spend all of that mental energy and bandwidth that I would have been using there on myself and my family, which was where it needed to be, because I was stretched beyond the capabilities that I had personally. And so, growth, you asked how I've grown, and I can't even explain in a short conversation the growth that I've experienced and just felt this year. I mean, this year has been truly amazing as far as the challenges, and not just organizationally and career wise. It's just, I mean, it's almost like an inside joke with my wife and I now that, I mean, 2024 is like it will not stop punching, man. I mean, as soon as something is finishing up and we get a little breath of air, something else is coming after it. And so it's just been nonstop. But again, it is truly exponentially raised the growth level of myself and in so many different areas. And so I'm thankful for that. And I'm also thankful to, just within the past month, be in a place to where all of those things are flowing again. And I've been able to sit down and get back on the podcast and do some writing and things like that. And so it's just a good time. I mean, is it smooth and comfortable and safe right now? No, absolutely not. But it's a great time because it's a time in which you are, I guess how I could put it is, you are seeing the growth, and you're seeing the blessings actually happen as they are, even though they're coming in packages that you might not like so much, that they're coming. And so it's good.
How are you seeing that? Um, you're talking gratitude practice right at the very end there. And thanks for
Yep.
sharing all of that. And we're stoked that you're back and that you're at a place that you can expand and share your heart again, and be a leader. Um, Even when most of the time, especially with the platforms that you're sharing on, podcasts and social media and stuff like that, like, yeah, you get a little dopamine bump here and there because of, oh, that episode did really well if you're tracking metrics, or I got a bunch of
Mhm.
likes or whatever. I mean, that's how those platforms are built, so you continue to consume, right? But there's a really good gem at the end of what you just said there, and it was all based in gratitude of, like, even when the tide is really, really rough, the shore is rocky, essentially, right? Like, you can still see some beauty in the pain or in the struggle. Like, how are you doing that? Like, give me a couple tools, because that's something that I absolutely am trying to focus more on, is like gratitude. I'm not really good about like journaling and like gratitude practice of like writing it down, but I really do try. Even if it's like, hey, I'm driving into work today and I know that maybe like organizationally we might have some challenges today, or it potentially is going to be a really long set or whatever. And we live in a beautiful place here in northern Colorado, and we have an amazing view of the Front Range when I leave my house and I get to the
Mhm.
top of this hill. And I've been trying really hard every single time I leave my house, regardless of time of day, if I can see the mountains, to just look at them and be
Take
like,
a moment and look. Yep.
damn, And so like
Yeah.
that has been something that I'm trying really, really hard over the last few months, to just like that one thing. Because then at the end of the day, if I look back, I'm like, well, dude, man, I remember what the mountains look like today. The sun was coming up and they were this amazing color. And when you start to appreciate that, especially in the fall season, like we have amazing colors going on. We got a great fall here this year. And I think it's probably because I'm getting old that I can see some of that. But like, how are you doing that? I mean, have you been formally trained in that? Like, how are you
I,
appreciating that?
man, I've not been formally trained in anything. I I think it comes down to two things. You know, if I'm specifically answering the question you are asking, it's two big things in my life. One of them is fairly new, and one of them is something that has been a lifetime thing. That one being faith. I just I have faith that as crappy as things are, it's exactly where I need to be. And yeah, that's a tough swallow or a pill to swallow sometimes, because yeah, I mean, especially some of the things, and we'll get into a few of them, but some of the things that I've experienced this year, it's like I would never volunteer for this. This is not something that I'm just enjoying, but I know that there's something that's going to come from it. I know I'm here for a reason. I guess to kind of go on a sidebar along with this, because it's important, because this is something I learned. You're talking about growth. When I'm in these times, there there are two questions, and I've said this on a few podcasts, but I think it's so important. These times of struggle and challenge, and the obstacles, I've found that I've got to ask myself two questions. The first one is, okay, I'm here, so what do I need to be learning while I'm here? There's something I need to be learning while I'm here. This is not a good place that I want to be, but there's something I can gain from this. There's something I can pick up and bring with me to the other side. And the second question is, okay, again, I don't want to be here, but I am here. And so who is here that I need to help? There's probably somebody here that I'm here to help them. Or you could even look at it the other way around. There may be somebody here that I need to gain something from. And so those two questions have really helped me to just kind of keep that picture tight on the process, of the growth that I'm going through, and what I need to do to become better, and not allow me to look at the problem and the obstacle and the challenge itself. I've got to stay focused on that process of growth as I'm going through it. And so that faith component is huge. The newer one that I mentioned is mindfulness. That's something that I was never really familiar with until last year, getting involved with the resiliency stuff. But man, it is amazing. And what you just explained, I mean, that right there is the definition of mindfulness. Driving to work, making sure that you take the time, even if it's 5 seconds, to look at the mountains and take that in, take the beauty in, and be in that moment. And for me, that has been, I mean, it has been critical for me, because it's so easy to look back and see, the things that were lost, and the the times that were not great, and then look forward and wonder what the future is going to hold, and how scary that might be. But no, it doesn't matter. It's right now. It's what are you doing right now? And just a few things that I really haven't even done it on purpose, but I'm noticing now that I'm doing, kind of like what you talked about, is we've got a lot of land here in Oklahoma, and we've got a giant swing area with a fire pit, and just going out at nights and looking at the stars, and just enjoying being outside, and different things like that. Actually taking the time instead of coming inside, because at the end of the day, like you said, I'm old, I'm tired, I'm ready to go to bed at 6 o'clock at night. But no, go enjoy the outside that you spend all day working on to make it look nice. Enjoy that, and take advantage of it, and be in that moment. So those are the big two that have kind of carried me through some of those times: faith and mindfulness.
Really good stuff. Yeah. And I think, a lot of times when we talk about mindfulness, and that's a consistent topic that we talk about here on the Firefighter Craftsmanship podcast, is it's not necessarily like the image of, the yogi sitting on the mountaintop in the
Yeah.
clouds in a lotus position or whatever, like Really it's presence, you know, and so being mindful of the reality of situations, um, sometimes the gravity of situations that we like create in our brains is way worse than what the actual reality of it is, you know. And I think you talked about like future casting, and man, it's really easy for our brains to go down that future road of like, oh my gosh. And I saw a clip the other day, and I don't even know where it came from. Just the algorithm is hilarious sometimes, and it just gives you great stuff that you need in that moment. You know, just about like, yes, the end goal is really far, and that's a massive mountain that you're trying to accomplish. Um, but you can't get there unless you take just that one step. And like, can you see the next step? And sometimes you can't, right? Like sometimes you're in the darkness and you
Yeah.
can't see the next step. And that's where maybe the next step is like, I'm going to try to detach from whatever's happening right here if it's not on a 911 call, right? And I'm going to go outside and like just try to like shake it out a little bit, like dust off, and then, you know, take one good deep breath on the porch or whatever, and maybe then I can see what that next step is, or maybe that is the
Yeah,
next step, you know.
sometimes, yeah, sometimes that next step is just being still in the moment and letting your mind catch up with the reality that you're living, you know, just that, if you want to call it meditation or whatever, it just taking the time for everything to sync together and just be in the moment. That's, yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
times that's the step we need to take, but we always want to be pushing and moving, and so that's hard for some of us to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of it too is sometimes you have to process the pain, you know, and the human experience involves pain and
Oh
agony
yeah.
and sadness and um, loss, but it also involves a lot of happiness, you know, and things like that. And so I think when if you don't take time to experience the pain of whatever the situation is, whether that's a tactical fitness workout, which there should be pain involved sometimes, right? Like anytime you do thrusters or burpees, there's absolutely pain involved in that, right? But just experiencing that, and then from that, you know, is growth. And I think that that's a concept that this audience can certainly appreciate. Is like, if we tie everything back to tactical fitness work, like you're intentionally experiencing some stuff, and you're taking yourself to a dark place because you're not just walking on the treadmill, right? You are
Mm-hmm.
intentionally putting yourself in a place because you know the reason that you're doing that, which is to be ready for the job of the things that might have to happen, or just to be able to maintain, right? Like when we put all of our PPE on and our gear and 70 pounds worth of stuff just for the opportunity to go do work, like we can look at it from a physiological standpoint and thoracic load capacity and VO2 max and all of this nerd stuff. But the reality is like it's harder to do work when you have all of this stuff on.
Yeah.
So that's why we're experiencing pain and doing relevant workouts, right? But then it's really hard when you take that out of like a job context, or a physical fitness context, and you're like, man, I'm going through this thing, and I gotta at least acknowledge and see, oh man, this is painful, right? I'm in the gutter, I'm depressed, whatever's going on, or like I'm dealing with challenges at home or organizationally or whatever, and just being like, I see you, but what's my next step, right? And so like you can't just continue to put that stuff away. And because if we do, and we never deal with it, or we never get it out, it will come back to bite you. It's just the way that the human
Yeah.
body works.
I think there's a pretty cool, whatever metaphor, whatever you want to call it, with what you just brought up, you know, that we have to operate with a lot of stuff on, you know, we're carrying a lot of things, we're doing a lot of different things in all of that. And similarly, you look at our life and, okay, we hit an obstacle, or we come up on a challenge. Are we running from that challenge? Are we trying to maneuver around the obstacle without actually, you know, going through it? Are we ducking the pain of these things? Because if we are, basically we're not training for the future if we are, because it's by going through these obstacles, it's by facing these challenges and feeling that pain and experiencing the growth, that we're able to then be ready for tomorrow's challenge and build on, and then the next one, and then the next one. Because if we find ourselves dodging the issues that we are facing, we're not going to be prepared when it gets harder, and it's going to get hard. That's life. And so I think there's a great comparison to that. You know, if we're not facing the reality that we should be facing and preparing ourselves and battle testing and all that, then man, we're putting ourselves in a big hole, because it's just going to increase as it goes.
Yeah, for sure. And there's not a lot of biohacking that you can use to get around that stuff. You
No,
got to have great quality
no,
systems, right? Good sleep systems. But at some point, you're probably going to lose some sleep. You're definitely going to lose
yeah,
some sleep if you're in emergency services, you know, but you're going to lose some sleep over stuff that mentally you're trying to process or trying to control and you can't control, or things like that. And I think that that's where mindfulness, and it could be sitting there and focusing on your breath. And we like to talk a lot about breath on this show and the impact of that. But it could just be when you're washing your hands. You know, I've had a provider, a clinician tell me like, hey, when you're washing your hands, like feel the temperature of the water.
mm-hmm.
If you're washing dishes at the firehouse, like a way to do presence, a way to do mindfulness is feel that sponge and the plate and the actual temperature of the water. And it's pretty wild when you start to do that in really small increments. It helps you, especially on emergency scenes of like, we talk all the time. You'll hear me say awareness is foundational. And these are those developmental exercises that you can use just by washing your hands and actually feeling the temperature of the water.
Yeah,
I'm aware of what's happening there versus I'm just like chasing my thought life or whatever.
yeah,
And I'm just trying to, move on to the next task or whatever. And I think that that's
yeah,
where, being present, it helps you be more resilient.
yep, absolutely. And I think it's for people that haven't heard things like that, it's probably kind of funny how simple that is, and how it doesn't seem like that's going to accomplish anything. Okay, I'm paying attention to the water, big deal. Well, it's about everything, as I'm sitting here in this chair, just feeling the weight of my body resting in it, and my feet on the floor, and if I'm rubbing my hands together, are they soft or are they worn out with calluses? Just the little things like that. And then you start doing those, intentionally, and then all of a sudden you start realizing you're doing it more and more without even noticing. And that's when it kind of becomes really neat to start to see those things.
Yeah. That was a pretty fun little tangent we just chased right there for sure. That's good stuff, right? And
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
that it's just ways that essentially it does make you tougher and more resilient. And in all of your answers so far, you've had a great growth mindset of this thing that I'm going through doesn't necessarily define who I am as a person. If I win, that's great. If I lose, that sucks, but I'm going to learn from it, right? And I think that that's a really important thing. Is it's not always like, if we're talking growth mindset versus fixed mindset, which comes from Dr. Carol Dweck, a fantastic book called Mindset, that I would highly encourage anybody to read. We'll link that in the show notes for sure. Just about, we trend one way or the other. And I think in emergency services, we build cultures around fixed mindsets, right? Of like, well, who's the best at throwing ladders? Who's the fastest at forcing doors? Who's whatever. And typically it's just the person that talks the loudest where we think that they are the best. And that's not always the case, but it's really like, especially I like to talk a lot about recruit training environments. Just from my experience, being assigned to a fire academy and getting to run the largest fire academy in Colorado as a lead instructor, and try to change some of the cultures around some of that thing where it's, of course they don't know how to throw a fire service ladder. They might have never thrown a ladder in their entire life. They don't even understand. It's like, throw it on the ground. What are you talking about? Right.
yeah,
And so we can't expect them and make them do push-ups and burpees the first rep when they don't do it correctly. Like, that's your fault as the instructor, And so
yeah,
what is the point of these environments? What is the point of training? And I think groups like Rick George's group and TRT, right? I would say groups like Brothers in Battle, who, you've been around. When you go to their classes, there's a lot of energy around these classes, and we got some really big personalities that are involved, especially with those two groups, with Rick and Cody specifically.
Yeah.
Great humans though, and they're in it for the right reasons. And when you actually go and you take these classes and you learn, and then you're supported when you fail, you're like, oh man, this wasn't bravado at all. Like, these dudes love me, and they
Yeah.
love the job, and they love the platforms that they're on, and they truly believe in this stuff. But they've also created very high expectations, but fantastic growth mindset cultures within it. And so this isn't all like, the snowflake culture of the fire service by any means. This is like very, very high standards, but man, a really supportive structure where they can meet you where you are and then push you to a level that you had no idea that you were going to get to.
Yeah. And I think that the growth mindset is probably one of the foundational things of, crew first culture. That's something that I wish that I could say I've had my entire career, but I haven't, just probably within the last 6 or 7 years, when all of these things kind of started falling together and all the pieces started connecting, is when I started realizing, oh yeah, I need to start getting better every day. And now seeing the importance of that, I think you brought up the being an instructor of students, and even people that aren't even firefighters yet, but they're trying to be, or whatever. But I think that's one of the biggest lessons that I now want to impress upon those type of groups, is the importance of adopting a growth mindset right now, and maintaining that your entire career. That is going to, man, it's going to make such a tremendous difference over the other way, that you won't even ever be able to quantify that. And yeah, you're going to fall off of that some, but if you can make that a habit, if you can make that just part of who you are, and just something that you default to, even the downtimes, they're gonna come and go quicker. You're gonna jump right back into that growth mindset, and man, it's going to be amazing. I can't tell you how many. I mean, the things I've learned, the areas I've grown, the skills that I've honed or whatever, just in the past 6 years, have been exponentially more than the first, what, 16 years of my career, whatever. And just because of that mindset, just because I'm seeking that knowledge and that growth, and that, the skill set, not just waiting for it to happen, or waiting for it to be brought to me. And so that's a big deal, especially, for the younger crowd.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. And it's probably just because of the age thing, but you've also probably learned how to kind of check your ego. And also, I would assume from talking to you and listening to your show that you don't really have a problem, even though it might be really hard, you don't have a problem going first, right? So like,
Yeah.
whether that's on the drill ground of saying, hey, here's a new skill, like I just read this article, or I took a conference, or I'm going to go first and show the junior guy or girl, hey, that's all right. Like, I might get my ass kicked, and then we can laugh and you can make fun of me because I'm going to make fun of myself. But at the end of it, like, well, that article was complete nonsense for me personally because of this, or like, holy cow, I need to get better at managing nozzle reaction and learning how to flow and move, or whatever the concept is, right?
Yeah.
So now, yeah, not everything that we do in emergency services for sure is easy, so whether you're a paramedic and you're learning how to intubate somebody, or you're learning IVs, EMS stuff, like, you're going to miss some IVs along the way, and now you're trying to get a stick in the back of a bus going down code 3 to the hospital, and like, that IV is completely different than it sitting in class on a mannequin or whatever, so
Mm-hmm.
like, you can pare it down to a very, very simple skill. But I think it's really easy for us in emergency services to focus 100% on basic skills, of like, yeah, it's easy for me to talk about forcible entry and Halligan work. And
Yeah.
it's really hard for me to talk about relationship work at home, or, less self work. And I think that that's something that all of us are, at some point, you're going to have to be on a quest to figure out how to develop yourself, and hopefully it happens when you're younger than when you're older, because you got a lot of stuff to unpack if you wait too long.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's important too, especially, people in our, bracket of the career right now is to impress those things upon the younger crowd. When I'm doing presentations or classes, whatever you want to call it, most of them have something to do with purpose and that growth mindset and things like that. And that's exactly why I want to always put that in there, is because I didn't know my purpose until I was almost mid 40s. If I could sit there and talk with people in their 20s or early 30s or whatever, and get them thinking about that, to where they start realizing the importance of it way way younger than I would did. I mean, that's going to make a big difference in their lives. And so I think that, yeah, absolutely. If you don't hear about these things, hopefully eventually through your growth process you'll learn about them, but it's going to be way down the road. And so it's up to people like us that know the importance of it and have truly believed in what we are doing to share that, so that they start to see, or start to at least hear the conversations, and it starts to become something that is on their mind. And eventually, things will start be put together, hopefully a lot earlier than a lot of us.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's pretty cool to see like where we've come in the last 5 to 7 years, especially in the fire service specifically, right? Of the conversations like you and I are having right now that we're broadcasting out. We're letting people get some benefits hopefully from this thing, but the conversations that are happening at all of the firehouse kitchen tables every day
Yeah.
now, and a lot of departments are talking about mental fitness in some regard. It's not just rub some dirt on it and pull your boots up. And there's absolutely a time and a place to rub some dirt on it and pull your boots up, right? Like, I think the easiest example of what does rub some dirt on it mean in real life is bear crawls in a fitness workout, right? Like, and if you don't agree, if you're like, oh, bear crawls are easy, well, you're a complete cyborg, first off. So congratulations. So then do them backwards in gear, right? They're terrible. Like that's what rub some dirt on it means, right? And sometimes you got to pick yourself up. Like, yeah, this situation that I'm in right now completely sucks, and by me belly aching about it, it's not going to change it. So I'm going to
Yeah.
rub some dirt on it, and I'm going to get tougher, and I'm going to get through it. And then I can have a practice where I look back and be like, all right, well, here's why I set myself up to be in that situation in the first place. I'm not going to do that again. Or, man, I got blindsided. What did I learn from that?
Yeah.
And that, there is a time and a place to just toughen up, but that can't be your only mental fitness strategy by any means.
No, no. And the underlying thing of that, what you just said, is that positivity, being able to maintain that positivity, even though it's not fun, even though it's something that you wish you weren't doing, finding a way to stay positive in what's happening, or at least focusing on what you are gaining out of it. I kind of touched on that already, but man, just being able to separate yourself from that negativity, separate from all the concentrating on how awful or painful or this or that something is, and just focus on whatever is good, even if it's something you might have to really look hard to find something good. Being able to keep your mind in that direction, man, that's a that's a difference maker right there.
Yeah. Well, and that's a timely thing. So I think for probably most of us of, hey, yeah, try to find something good. And then where can we go from here, right? Always working towards a little bit better. So recently I think this is a good segue. Recently you've gotten some opportunities to work with like some youth athletes and things like that. and sharing your story. You talked about that on your comeback episode on Crew First Culture, and so that stuff to me is always really, really interesting. I've been very fortunate where I've gotten to work with some youth athletes as well, and that really was the impetus for me to actually go back and get my master's degree in sports psychology, was because I was getting those requests to come and teach youth athletes, from firefighters that had attended one of the classes that we teach. And I'm like, man, I need some formal education so I don't mess some of these kids up. And so kind of talk about that. Like, it's really interesting for me that, a 10-year-old baseball team is getting some really good pre-performance routine stuff. They're getting mindset stuff, right? Like, hey, here's your routine before you step in the batter's box. And they're only a couple years outside of T-ball, and they're getting some great stuff. And then when you come into a fire academy scenario and you ask anybody, hey, have you ever had a mental performance class, worked with a sports psych, anything like that? And you'll have B1 athletes in the room, and even some of them have never been exposed to some of these concepts. Mm-hmm. I think it's a disservice to emergency services that this isn't a part of curriculum everywhere.
Yeah.
So, what have you been able to do, like with the youth athletes? And then what are some of those things that you've been able to glean where it's like, man, we need to put this into emergency services?
So honestly, I haven't been able to be involved near as much as I want to be. I think it's still kind of early on. I've got 2 kids still in school. We've got 8 altogether, if people out there haven't heard me say that, but 2 are still in school. One is a junior and the other is in 7th grade. And so they both play sports. Daughter plays pretty much anything that she can. And the youngest, our son, is in jujitsu. And so right away, they've been kind of my little training ground, trying to teach them breath work and teach them some of these calming things. And so I've been working with them for basically as long as I've been knowing these things. And so that the relationship of them being in school and getting to know a couple of the coaches there at school led me into a really cool opportunity to kind of be not anything official, but like a mental resiliency coach for the football team last year. And so that was really cool. Worked with them every week. I met with them unless I was on shift, pretty much every week. Kind of created some mindfulness YouTube videos and some different things that they could sit and listen to. And so it was really neat. And man, I just started realizing that this stuff is not just for special forces, soldiers. It's not just for firefighters and cops. I mean, every single person needs to learn these things, the breath work and the being able to set and segment problems and the mindfulness and all of these things that we're teaching and you're doing over the podcast and with your organization. Everybody needs to hear this. I mean, I don't care. Like you brought up kids out of T-ball. Yeah. We're not going to go into a 2-hour lecture over mindfulness practices, but to sit there and go through a couple breathing techniques, kids can do that. That's something that would be great for them to start working on super early. And I've seen tremendous progress in our son, especially of just seeing him do it on his own. That's the cool thing, is not having to sit there and coach him, but when he's in a tournament, to be way away from him and just see him sitting there kind of almost like meditating a little bit, working on breath and things like that. And so some things happened with the football team. The coach moved to a different place, and so that, unfortunately, that momentum that we gained, it kind of died right there. I've got back in contact with him and did a few things with his current school, football team at his current school, and that was cool. But it's just hard because of the distance and really everything that we're going through as well. And so timing is not right now. I think that I think there's something there that, you know, hopefully the future holds, that, you know, I can maybe prepare more and have more of a program for it, and really kind of start spreading that out. But now it's just kind of, you know, if somebody asks me about something, yeah, absolutely, we're going to talk about whatever you want to know about. Or if I see somebody kind of struggling with some things, I might, if I, you know, if they're friends with my daughter, or you know, whatever, I might have that conversation. But it's something that is needed for sure, and it's something I really look forward to doing more in the future.
Yeah, it's really fun. And it's a lot of fun in emergency services as well, but it's really fun to work with like the youth, in my mind, you know, of like,
Yeah.
because they have those, they don't have so many barriers, right? And they're not, even with teenagers, they're not like super on edge. They might be like, yeah, whatever, dad, right? Like, especially if you're trying to do that in your own house, it's a lot harder than if you're being able to do it with some of their friends, or a football team or something like that, you know?
Well,
So
I think the coolest thing, sorry to cut you off. I think the coolest thing about it is their issues are so minor in the big scheme of things. You know, they're stressed out about a game, or they're stressed out about a test in a subject. And so when you can use these things to help them in those environments, well, then they're becoming part of their foundation, so that when they're out of school and their problems get to be real problems, like things that we have faced, that they already have those tools in place. So we're not having to kind of catch them. All right, I know you're going through the hardest thing you've ever been through, but let me teach you some things. Well, they already have those in place. I think that's one of the coolest things about that, is catching it early when, yeah, things are serious to them, but in the big scheme of the full picture of life, it's really not. But you can use those moments to really make a difference.
yeah, absolutely. And you hit it the nail right on the head about, if you're a human, these things apply to you, right? Whether you're a kid in T-ball, or you're a 30-year vet, who's looking at the next phase of life, and you're getting ready to retire from you know, the fire service or whatever. Um, these things apply to you, and you're using a lot of these tools already, right? Just based on you being a human, you've found ways to overcome adversity. You know, if you're on the job in any emergency services at all, you've had to work really hard to get there, first off, and you've had to overcome adversity, whether it's through training or on scene things, organizational challenges, all of that sort of stuff. And so you're using some of these things. You're using imagery training. We think in pictures, right? You're using your breath, because somebody along the way said, take a deep breath. Um, but now it's just honing those skills and figuring out which ones work for you. And maybe that's, you know, journaling or whatever, and then just expanding upon those things and really celebrating the success of those different skills, and then trying to share it a little bit, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean putting it together a big program and working every single week with the school, or going to the fire academy and teaching or whatever. It could just be with a junior member, right? When they're really trying to absorb information, and you just say, hey man, like, you know, sometimes this job can really suck. Like, some days suck. That's just the what it is. Here are a couple of the tools that I use to navigate those challenges, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yesterday we ran a call that sucked, you know, like at work, and we did everything that we possibly could do, and the end result wasn't what we wanted. And it's an emotional thing, and it just, some days just suck, right? And so it's like, you have to have tools and systems and processes to not just push the pain down, to be like, hey fellas, you guys all good, right? Like, that sucked, but what you guys did, and the effort that you put forth, and the basic skills that we've worked really, really hard on, you absolutely crushed it, man. You gave that situation the best that you possibly could. And it's still a loss, you know?
Yeah.
So where do we go from here? And so,
Yeah.
and a lot of times it's like, well, we don't go anywhere from here with basic skills. You crushed it, right? And it's just acknowledging that, especially with junior members, and saying, hey, great job, dudes, you know, on to the next one. I mean, you just have to process it, but it's okay to be like, that sucked.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a hard thing about the job. And that's something that, you don't necessarily enjoy sharing with people that are new, because it's hard to, I mean, we want to, sometimes it's better to lose than to not know. And a lot of times that's the result we get too, is, how are they doing? I don't know. Nobody will talk to us. We can't get information. So yeah, it's, again, goes back to that. It's not the results, it's the process. We got focusing on a process. We we either didn't have a good result, or we don't know the result, but it didn't look good. But man, we did everything we possibly could. And that's got to be the focus, because if we sit here and start tallying up all these losses and the few wins that we might have too, it's not gonna ever end well. And so it's just focusing on that process of it. That's the important part.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. How do you think that we build like more adaptable cultures, like within ourself, obviously within the crew, whatever your like direct work dynamic is, and then like organizationally, how can we become more adaptable? Because I think like in emergency services, we're very adaptable. If you look at the call types that we run today, regardless of what organization you work with, you could be a volunteer or career, any of the industries within emergency services. The call types that we run today are completely different than they ran in 1950. So we're adaptable as groups where typically it's just like, oh yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that. We'll do that. Oh, you're going to cut our budgets.
Yeah.
Great. We'll still do that. But how do we take that mentality and kind of grow that? Like everything has to start with the individual. And to me, it seems like you're pretty adaptable. You've taken some licks along the way, but you've been like, okay, I'm going to growth mindset this thing. I'm going to work on being present. And then where do we go from here is kind of that mentality. But do you have a system or any suggestions on how we can just be maybe a little more pliable?
Uh, I think I think a big early or first step is, you gotta know who you are first. Self-reflection, honest self-reflection, to where, okay, this is who I am. This is the person that I am portraying to other people because of my actions and the things I'm saying. Okay, now who do I want to be? And lay that out and truly figure out, okay, this is the person I want to be. This is how people are perceiving me right now. So there's obviously a gap there I need to fill, and that's going to give me a direction. But when it really comes down to it, I think that it's just about treating ourselves just like we do in the fire. But you're talking about how diverse our job is, all these different skills. Well, we train in these different skills. We learn about these different skills. We seek out knowledge and seek out experience from others. Well, that's exactly what we need to do for ourselves. If we struggle with connecting with others, well, read some books about connecting with others and building relationships, and start realizing how important it is, and talking to people that are good at it, and seeing what they think we can do to get better at it. And that's, maybe that's too simple of a way to lay it out, but I believe that's truly how it is. There's a lot of things that, man, I've still got a long way to go to get where I need to be at, lot topic wise. And there are some others that 15 years ago, man, I was a completely different person in that area. But I sought out information and content, and read books and listened to podcasts, and learned from others that I was around, and gained a better a better way to do things in that particular area. And I think that's, we have to be open-minded and humble enough to do that. That's required. If we don't have the humility to say and think that there's a better way to do it than we're doing it, or that somebody else knows something that I need to know and that I don't know, we're never going to go anywhere. And so that's, humility is big. And then just being open-minded to say, you know, we're going to sit here and learn something about meditation. It sounds goofy, and the things I've seen on TV about meditation is not who I want to be, but we're going to be open-minded and learn about it, because maybe there's something there. Maybe even if I don't do it exactly like everybody else does, but I can pull a couple pieces out and use it in my life, and that's just one goofy example. But just that open-mindedness to really branch out and see what the world has to offer. Because if I think it compares directly to fire departments, the mindset of the fire departments. If you work for a fire department that thinks they have it all figured out, and this is the way we do it, and there is nothing else that matters because nobody else responds to our city. We know our city, and this is how we handle our city. Well, I promise you, you're not doing things the best way that they can be done. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you are or where you're at. If you're not reaching out and learning from others, and I've worked, I've got what 120 people in suppression on my department. So can I go to a class taught by a New York City firefighter and bring something back? Absolutely. I mean, it might just be a little thing, because 98% of what they teach does not apply, but there still may be something. And just having the awareness that it doesn't have to be the whole thing. Just take the stuff that is helpful and bring that back to you, and start incorporating that in yourself. And that's where it all is. And again, it comes back to growth again. That growth mindset of being open-minded enough to really take it in and start applying it where you can.
Yeah, for sure. And just one step at a time. And I think it's a great mentality and a mindset to go into training, especially training that you're seeking and you're potentially paying for out of your own pocket, and being like, the expectation typically, at least for me, is always like, oh, I'm going to learn so much stuff. And sometimes you do. But sometimes you're like, man, that class was kind of a miss. Um,
Yeah.
but here's one or two things that I did learn, and then how can I apply those to my situation, And so,
Yeah.
and that's where like the regional conference is so cool. Is it's training compared to like when you and I got into the game. Training now is very, very easy to consume and reach and get to. There's a conference that's probably within a couple hours of you at the most at this point across the country. And if there's not, you're probably looking at how do I create one, And so there's a lot of really, really cool stuff that's out there. And I think for us, at the Firefighter Craftsmanship for sure is, well, how can we start to incorporate human performance into this sort of stuff? Because that is the foundational element of all of these basic skills is, man, if you show up and you're completely burned out and exhausted, first off, you're probably not in a class. Um, but sometimes on the job, right, that 911 bell goes off and you got to go regardless of how tired you are, and you got to perform, and the expectations are very, very high, which we need to try to meet those things from the community standpoint. And so the human is the one thing that's very, very consistent, regardless of what system you work in or what tools you have or what kind of rigs you ride on, or what your response profile looks like with how many
Mm-hmm.
people are showing up for that first alarm fire. Every single one of those deals with humans. And I think that that's where, it has to start with yourself. And like you talked about, you have to be aware of where you actually stand. And then what are the things that I do really well? And let's try to build those things. But then where are those blind spots or those areas that are weaknesses that I can grow? And you don't just wallow on, I have all of these negative attributes, right? But okay, man, I'm having a hard time. I get really amped up on scenes. Okay, well, there's lots of information out there on how to de-stress. Breath work would be great for you.
Yeah.
Like, all of that sort of stuff. How can I process more information in a hyper paced environment? Yesterday we got to do live fire, which was awesome, super fun, but I noticed like as the officer and you're doing a 360, like by the time you get back to the door, because we practice so much, our nozzle, and we were riding 4 on the engine yesterday. So we have 2 dudes that are helping deploy hose lines. They are standing there like fully masked up, waiting on me to get back. And I'm like, I am so far behind the 8 ball, but I'm now the initial commander. I still got to do assignments, like all of this stuff. And so it's like, all right, like I got to get faster. You can always get faster at mask up times, right? You can always get faster at 360, but make sure that you don't also not see the problem that you're trying to deal with. And so a really simple thing that I talk to the junior guys about is like, hey, I'm going to bring in a little tripod and we're going to do some game film, right? Like I got to figure out ways, like where am I wasting energy and time? Because you dudes are smoking me. By the time I get back to the 360, you're already like, dude, let's go, right? And so some of that is because it's a training environment and there's not a lot of stuff in the way and we know how long the stretch is and blah, 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 blah. But you have to expand upon like, dude, I feel like I'm way behind the 8 ball, even though I'm hustling, right? I'm moving pretty fast. So how can I expand those deficiencies there? And I think that just that little teeny concept right there, if you have like, first off, you're kind of vulnerable and you say, hey, this is a deficiency and something we're going to work on. And we're going to film it. So when you film stuff like that, especially on a training environment, you're like, holy cow, I wasted so much time and energy, in a place that I've been in 100 times. And I think if we can take that kind of like you talked about, like, well, read a book about it, or call Jeremy or call me or send us an email or dive into a podcast episode or whatever, man. There's a lot of really cool information out there that can not make you feel worse about yourself, but actually give you some tools and processes that you can start to apply and figure out how do they apply and how can you make them better for you personally.
Yeah. And I think just being that type of, you're kind of speaking from a formal leadership officer perspective right now, but I think having that as an example for a crew, I mean, that's amazing. I mean, what crew member is going to be able to just sit there and think, man, I don't want to try something new because I don't want to look like an idiot. If my officer is being, of that mind, being able to put himself out there and being able to say, hey, man, I'm trying. I've got some areas I'm going to work on to catch up with you guys. You guys are doing great. If that's my boss, I'd have no reason to not push myself with everything I have. So I think that's really great to point out, that when you are in those roles, using those times like that as a way to just, man, keep everybody engaged because they see what you are giving them. They don't want to give any less than that. And so it's just really going to fire up that culture even faster.
Yeah. You got to go first, and whether you're the probie or whether you're the chief of department, at some point in your life, you just have to make the commitment to go on first and looking like a complete bozo and being able to laugh at yourself, like we try really hard to take the job seriously, but we certainly do not take ourselves, especially as a cohesive unit, very seriously. And everybody has their turn in the barrel. And yes, there are some cultures out there with people listening to this show where like that unfortunately does not exist. And there is a lot of energy behind like the ball bust and that happens, that it's not good natured fun by any means. And so it's up to you to figure out how can you work on changing those environments. Just because it's always been that way doesn't mean that it has to be that way if you're involved in it. Right. And so it's not an easy thing though. It's not all unicorns and rainbows by any means. It's you're going to have to work. And sometimes, like we've talked about a bunch, and it's a very controversial thing in the fire service specifically, is you might have to leave that organization and go somewhere else where you can actually grow and be allowed to grow and push the pace and all of that sort of stuff. And yes, that is a very hard thing to do. But that might ultimately be the end result. But just make sure that you're not just running away from the pain and the agony that's involved with trying to change cultures within yourself, within your family unit, within your crew, and especially within an organization. That is not a very easy process, it's going to be a little bit of a grind.
Yep. The big word there is control. We can spend all our energy and just sit there and spin our wheels and become so frustrated and checked out and everything if we don't focus on what we can control. We're focused on trying to change somebody else's mind, or trying to push an agenda that is just not going to go, or trying to share a message that somebody's just not ready to take in. Well, sometimes it's just, okay, I can't control that. I can't make any choices. I can't make him understand the message I'm sharing. So it's time to find another outlet, another way that is within my control. And that's something that, as an officer, I can't tell you how many times that veering outside of my control got me in either trouble or got me in a place mentally that I shouldn't even have been there. It beat me down. It wore me out. It just, it disengaged me sometimes, and I shouldn't have even made that possible, because I should have just stayed within my control. And so I had to learn that over and over and over, and probably still learning it over and over.
Yeah. And I think for me, I'm pretty sure that you've been like bugging my life based on some of the answers that you've given recently. You got it. You're watching me, man, so like,
Mm,
but that's where these conversations are so great. And it's really easy to get down in the ditch and just never be able to see on top, and so, um, like try to build those communities around you, of people that will help fact check you or be like, man, I get it, dude. You got a lot of passion and energy around this. And I don't disagree with it by any means, but you also need to win some battles along the way. So maybe put a little bit of that energy behind this other like easy win and get the
mm-hmm.
snowball building, and
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah.
that that's a good thing, that it's really, really hard, especially for high performers and people that are focused on positive growth and they want it to happen right now or yesterday. It's really, really easy to just then spend way too much energy on the negativity stuff, versus like, hey, let's celebrate the small wins. Let's absolutely celebrate the big wins when we get them. Let's just not. Cool. I'm glad that we finally won. Golly, that was a 7-year pain fest. Now on to the next thing that I'm going to bitch and complain about. Right. So like,
Mm-hmm.
if you have any coaching on how we can actually perform and do that mentally, I am all ears for sure.
Yeah. No, that's something that, man, it it's one of those trial and error things that, for me, when I first became a captain, man, I was ready to fight for any and everything. I mean, the big stuff, the little stuff. If I felt like there was a reason for it, then I wanted to fight for it. And I found out that, well, now you have no voice at all in any situation, because you basically become the person that gripes and complains about everything. And so really had to realize that, all right, I am going to have to pick my battles, and some of these little things that don't matter, we're just going to either go with it because that's what we have to do, and we got to bite it on this one, or we're going to figure out a way to make it work for us, or whatever. And so I have, some of that reserve built up when something really happens. It's like, okay, this policy that you're about to put out is not okay. This has got to change. You're going to put people in danger, whatever. That's the times I have to have a voice. And if I'm sitting there becoming that person that just is disgruntled with anything that comes down from above, when those times come, nobody's going to listen to me. And so that is another really hard lesson that I had to learn. And it's hard to learn because in my mind, these things that I'm speaking up for, yeah, they might be little, but I wasn't doing them just to be that guy. I was doing them because there was a reason. You know what I mean? And so it's hard for me to sit there and think, okay, yeah, there's a reason for it, but you have to step back. And I think that was the thing. If it was something that I had no reason doing, or if I was just being a jerk, it wouldn't have had that tie it would have been something very obvious for me to say, yeah, that needs to stop. But we can sit here and tie ourselves to something and really almost justify anything if we want to. And so we just really have to, again, be honest with ourselves about why I'm wanting to fight this. Is it worth it? And or is it something I need to save up this capital that I'm about to burn for another time that might be a lot bigger?
Yeah. Great example. Yeah. And I think all of us can definitely use that mindset. And once again, this is not an easy mindset to
No.
adopt or implement by any means, but it once again, it just ties back to being aware, having some emotional intelligence, understanding the things that like, this is a battle that I could put a lot of energy into and I'm not going to win. Um, or is this a battle like, hey, this is a severe safety issue and it's time for me to use my rank and my position and my capital. I love that, right? Your leadership capital on this one here, and not just be another um, piece of the noise puzzle, you know? And so I think
Mm-hmm.
all of us, regardless, right? Regardless of what organization you work for, regardless of what type of leader that is running whatever program or company or battalion or department or whatever, like nobody goes to work and intentionally wants to suck. You know, they don't just
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm going to go and I'm going to just destroy what all these guys and girls are working really hard to do, you know, and I'm not going to do the best for what's the community like. But we certainly get motivated by different things along the way, and whether that's who your boss is or how you get paid or whatever, there's certainly ego and politics and all of that stuff involved. But I think that if we can figure out how do we create supportive environments that aren't afraid of conflict, or conflict is not a bad thing. I'm not talking about like going outside and punching each other in the
Yeah.
face. I'm talking about
Oh yeah.
like in the room being like, no, dude, I don't agree with that. Like, and these are the reasons why, from my perspective. And you better justify yours. I don't have any problem
Mm-hmm.
having those conversations, or those are the organizations that I absolutely want to be a part of, you know, is an
Yeah.
organization that's not like, well, I'm going to do that because I'm bigger than you and I'm going to punch you in the head if you don't agree with me. No, that's not what I'm talking about. It's like,
Yeah.
let's challenge the stuff, right? Like, well, why are we doing that? And if you tell me, well, that's the way we've always done it, there's not an
Yeah.
answer, you know, just be like, dude, I don't know. Like, that's what they taught me. And I have no energy to put into that. Have fun with it if you want, but that's not that big of a deal to me. Beat it,
Yeah.
you know? And so like, that's okay too. But I think that we need to have this kind of conversation of like, how do we challenge things like our shift schedules? How do we challenge the actual call types that we're running? Like how do we do that stuff? But maybe today it's like, dude, we have these nozzles that are on our apparatus that have never been serviced, right? The technology is completely outdated. It was a great idea, but it doesn't apply to our environment anymore. And they've been on there since 1982. We probably should change that. I'm not
Yeah.
talking about organizational change. I'm talking about like the actual delivery to Mrs. Smith on the one thing that it says on the back of all of your firefighter t-shirts, which
Mm.
is the fire department, right? Like those are a lot of the battles that some people are fighting, and they're running
Yeah.
up against a lot of things that are very, very hard to mentally kind of process and be resilient within.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So I mean, what a great conversation. We really appreciate you taking the time with us. It's good to see you again. And I'm stoked that the Crew First Culture podcast and all of the social media stuff is back. I'm excited to see what the next steps are for you and for that, you know, platform. I'm stoked to hear that you're teaching with Rick George, Dave Gillespie, and the Tactical Resiliency folks. How can people find you if they want to?
Well, I've tried to make everything as easy as possible. Everything is pretty much under Crew First Culture. The one is a one, so Crew One ST Culture. We got a website that's crewfirstculture.com. Uh, Instagram, Facebook, Crew First Culture. The podcast is Crew First Culture Podcast, and that's on pretty much everything. I've got a YouTube channel that I put, most of those episodes on, if you rather watch on YouTube, and some training videos and other things as well. And that's, again, it's Crew First Culture. But as far as contacting me, just direct messaging through any of those, or my contact information is on the website. But you can also email me at crew first culture. That's what, again, with a one, at yahoo.com. So anything like that shouldn't be hard to find.
Fantastic. And yeah, easy enough, right? Good job with your branding and keeping everything consistent and easy to find you for sure. And I'd highly encourage the listener to check out the Crew First Culture podcast. And there's something in there that you're going to find and be able to listen to. And probably the best episode you've ever had ever was, featuring this clown named Kevin Housley. So
this is a good one. It
Yeah.
was. I enjoy that.
It was a lot of fun for sure. So, well, thanks again, Jeremy. It's good to see you, man. We really appreciate you spending the time. Thanks for listening to the Firefighter Craftsmanship podcast. Don't forget to share this show and give it to somebody that needs it. And we're all in this together. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or hit me up on LinkedIn at Kevin Housley, and stay smart.